This is a chord interval of Viking Formation. The Viking Formation is Lower Cretaceous in age, and it's Upper Albian. The core was logged by James McEachern and Dave Bechtel, but it sits in the Chigwell area, which is in the area of where a former student of George Pemberton's, Indranil Ray Shadhuri, or a lot of people know him as Indy, worked. And Indy did that study with Roger Walker back before he was working with George in 1989. And he did a study about the erosional discontinuities in the Chigwell field. And this relates to that quite well, because at the very base of this succession is an erosional surface, and something we'll talk about in a moment, which is the Glossifungites Ichnofacies. Let's first look at the core in general, though. Although the Viking Formation is commonly known for having incised valley successions, such as at Crystal or Williston Green, it is probably even better known for its shoreface successions. In a lot of areas, like Hamilton Lake, there's shoreface and delta successions, and in a lot of parts of the Viking, it's just the lower shoreface sometimes that's preserved, and maybe minimal parts of the middle and upper shoreface. Here we have something like looks like a more complete shore face of the Viking Formation. And if we zoom in a little bit on this, we can look at some of the ichnological characteristics. We start at the base with an omission suite of thalassinoides in a firm ground, and then if you look up through the core, it coarsens upwards, and you'll find asterosoma and phycosiphon we've labeled. Also Schaub-cylindricness, tychicness, asterosoma. Look for these labels, and you'll see where they occur in what's likely to be the lower shore face. You can see on this core that James and David classified this trace fossil assemblage as a proximal expression of the Cruziana Ichnofacies. You don't really have to worry too much about what that means. We looked at some ichnofacies in association with the Rosellia and phycosiphon ichnofacies in deltas. And if you haven't done those core yet, you will looking forward. And remember that the Cruziana ichnofacies is, if anything, most associated with the offshore and upper offshore. However, it goes into the lower shore face as it starts to incorporate elements of the more shallow water Scalethos ichnofacies. And James McEachern and George Pemberton started referring to these materials like this in the late 80s and early 90s as proximal and distal expressions. And they're worth learning about because it's a very convenient way to interpret and identify the significance of your ichnological assemblages in shore faces. As you go up, you'll see more asterosoma, tychicness, and in fact, you get another erosional discontinuity with a pebbly lag, and it goes into what's primarily offshore units that are rich in Diplocraterium, Planolides, and Phycosiphon. That's what these are right here. We'll have these labeled throughout, and if you have any questions, by all means, talk to one of the presenters about it. In the core, the only core image I'm going to show you here is that of the Glossifungites surface. So that's down below. And what are you looking at when you look at this? Well, you see a shalier bit of rock here, and then there's a bit of a sharp discontinuity that's coming up through here. And you can see that burrows within that shaly unit cross-cut the more shaly rock below from the more sandy rock above. And you'll notice there's actually an ichnology change here. Looking a little closer, you see all of these little flecks below the Glossifungites surface. There's this black thing here, there. They're kind of occurring in pairs. And these are actually the meanders of a trace fossil called Helminthopsis that are being displayed in the two-dimensional view of the core. when you see these, they'll actually look a bit like this. You'll see these pairs of black flecks that are actually meander loops. Let's say that's a bedding plane view, and the meander loop is cut by the face of the core. Going back to the core here, you can see that that burrow I've circled there isn't the only element of the Glossifungites Ichnofacies. There's a few that are evident here. Also notice the ichnological change above the glossy surface. There's these streaky burrows here that might be, it's actually kind of hard to say what that is. Could be Tychicnus, but it actually could be Zoophycus. And there's definitely thalassinoides. Some maybe have a lining in here, so there might be some ophiomorph above that. And then into some parts where there appears to be basically asterosoma above here. How does a Glossifungites surface form? Well, let's first look at this and agree that this sediment here was deposited, and it was probably compacted before this unit was put on top of it. The main idea here is that this sediment is deposited and compacted. It's in the offshore, perhaps. You have a drop in sea level and then a rise in sea level, so you get this basically a surface, a flooding surface / sequence boundary forming at this level. And then as sediment piles on top of this, animals colonize this sediment and they dig down into the underlying unit, delivering sand from above into these units below. And so it's an indication of a gap in time, a disconformity, or an emission surface. Tom Saunders did a painting back in the 90s that showed how he thought these could form, and he didn't really draw the palimpsest or the earlier ichnological assemblage in here, but you can see he has the sediment being deposited, and it's compacted, and then it's eroded by wave energy or some type of energy. And now it's the firm surface that's exposed. And in this model, it's colonized by shrimp. These shrimp are something like a Callianassa, really what we would call a thalassinid decapod shrimp. Then over time, sedimentation recommences on top of that surface, and we fill in these burrows with these pebbles and granules and sands from above. A modern example comes from Willapa Bay, where we can see this is a salt marsh mud that's been exposed by wave ravinement near the mouth of Willapa Bay. This is out on the west coast of Washington State, a place where I've done a lot of work. And you can see this backshore mud has been exposed. It was buried for several hundreds of years. Now it's a firm mud, and you can see these very large burrows that are in it, like there and there. And those burrows will ultimately funnel sediment down into them like that one has there. It has shell and sand debris. And just like Tom's painting, this bioturbated Glossifungites surface was made by this little fellow. It's a decapod crustacean, a thalassinid shrimp called Upagebia pujatensis.